A soft morning breeze moved across Arlington National Cemetery as groups of visitors arrived quietly to see one of the most respected sites in America, the tomb of the unknown soldier. Among them was a bus full of high school students on their spring field trip. Most of the students were excited to see Washington, D.C., but for a few the idea of visiting a cemetery didn't sound interesting at all. They wanted fun and photos, not silence and rules. As they stepped off the bus, their teacher, Mrs. Carter, reminded them, "This is a place of deep honor. Please remember to stay quiet and respectful." The students nodded, though not all truly listened. A few boys at the back, Jake, Ryan, and Leo, shared a quiet laugh, pretending to march like soldiers. They didn't mean to be cruel. They were just acting silly, unaware of how serious the place really was. The group followed a paved path until they reached the marble steps overlooking the tomb. The white stone shone in the sun, clean and still. Everyone could feel the calm around it, like time itself had slowed down. A soldier known as the tomb guard stood perfectly still beside the tomb. He wore a flawless uniform, his shoes shining so much they almost reflected the clouds above. In his hands he carried a rifle with unmatched precision. The crowd gathered, whispering softly. Even the air felt heavy with meaning. But then Jake, one of the boys, whispered too loudly, "So what's he even guarding? There's nobody here to steal anything." A couple of other teens giggled. A few adults turned and frowned at them, but Jake just smirked. He didn't understand yet. The guard began to move. Every step was sharp, every motion perfectly timed. He turned, paused, then marched again. Each action done with pride and focus. The sound of his shoes striking the stone echoed clearly. It wasn't noise. It was rhythm, discipline, and respect combined into one. But the teens at the back started losing patience. "He's been doing this for like 5 minutes straight," Ryan whispered. "Doesn't he get bored?" Leo laughed softly, trying not to be noticed, but the laughter spread between them like a secret. They thought they were quiet enough, but the guard noticed everything. He didn't look at them yet. His face remained straight, his eyes fixed forward. That calmness somehow made the moment even more powerful. Around them, the tourists began to grow uneasy. One woman shook her head in disappointment. A man nearby whispered, "Show some respect, kids." Still, the boys didn't stop right away. They didn't realize how sacred this moment was, not just for those who served, but for everyone watching. Then the tomb guard stopped. The sound of his final step echoed sharply. He turned, facing directly toward the group. His movements were slow, exact, and controlled. The laughter died instantly. Every eye turned toward him. For a few seconds, silence filled the air. Even the wind seemed to pause. The guard's voice then rang out clear and strong, but without anger. It was steady and full of meaning. "It is requested that everyone maintain silence and respect at all times." Those words carried weight far heavier than they sounded. The teens froze. The tone wasn't harsh, it was firm, professional, and full of something they had never felt before. Deep honor. Jake's face turned red. Ryan looked down at his shoes. Leo wished he could disappear. The crowd stood in quiet respect as the guard turned back to his post and resumed his march as though nothing had happened. No one spoke for a long while. The silence that followed was unlike anything the teens had ever experienced. It wasn't just quiet. It was full of emotion. Like every step of that guard carried the stories of those who could no longer tell their own. The teens began to understand that he wasn't guarding a tomb for the sake of routine. He was standing for all the unnamed heroes who had given everything. Mrs. Carter gently placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Now do you understand why we're here?" she whispered. Jake nodded slowly, unable to meet her eyes. He watched the guard continue his steps, each one the same distance, the same rhythm, the same focus. There was no smile, no distraction, only duty. The sound of the rifle shifting on the guard's shoulder echoed once more, reminding everyone that this was more than a performance. It was a promise that no matter who came to watch, the unknown soldiers would never be forgotten. Jake swallowed hard. The words of the guard repeated in his head again and again. Silence and respect. It wasn't just a rule, it was a lesson. He realized how foolish his laughter had been. Around him, his friends stood still, eyes fixed on the guard, their earlier amusement now replaced with awe. As the ceremony continued, the boys no longer joked. They didn't whisper. They stood in complete silence, feeling something new, something bigger than themselves. When the guard changed shifts with another sentinel, the crowd watched in quiet admiration. Every move was smooth, practiced, and perfect. Jake thought about how many hours that guard must have trained for this moment. He imagined standing in the rain, in the cold, in the heat, all without complaint, just to honor someone whose name he might never know. That kind of dedication was something Jake had never seen before. When the ceremony ended, the teacher gathered everyone. She didn't scold them. She didn't need to. The lesson had already been taught. As they walked back to the bus, Jake glanced one last time at the tomb. The guard still stood there, still silent, still strong. Jake whispered softly, almost to himself. "I didn't get it before, but I do now." Mrs. Carter heard him and smiled quietly. "That's why we come here," she said. As the bus doors closed and the students settled into their seats, the laughter from earlier never returned. They talked about what they had seen, not as kids joking around, but as young people who had witnessed something meaningful. Jake leaned back, watching the cemetery fade from view through the window. He felt different, more mature, more aware. The moment might have lasted only a few minutes, but for Jake and his friends it became a memory they would never forget. The guard's simple words and calm presence had taught them more than any lecture ever could. And for the rest of their trip, whenever they passed another monument or flag, they stayed silent not because they had to, but because they now understood what true respect meant. The group of students continued walking along the cemetery path after witnessing the tomb guard's precise and solemn march. The silence that had settled over them felt almost heavy, as if the air itself carried the weight of countless untold stories. Jake, Ryan, and Leo walked quietly behind their classmates, each lost in thought. They no longer whispered jokes, and the earlier laughter felt like a distant memory they wanted to erase. For the first time that morning, they began to truly notice the beauty and meaning of the cemetery. The rows of white tombstones stretched endlessly, each one marking the life of a person who had given something precious. Some were young, some older. Some had served long ago and others more recently. It was impossible to ignore the sense of duty and sacrifice that hung in the air. The teacher, Mrs. Carter, led the group toward a quieter section of the cemetery, away from the main crowds. "I want you all to think about what you just saw," she said softly. The guard didn't shout. He didn't punish anyone. He simply reminded everyone of respect and honor. That is his way of teaching. Jake glanced over at Ryan and Leo. He could see the same thoughts mirrored on their faces. For the first time, they weren't thinking about fun or jokes. They were thinking about meaning, sacrifice, and responsibility. Each step they took felt different. Even the crunch of gravel beneath their shoes seemed louder and more respectful. A few minutes later, the students gathered near a smaller monument. Here, the guide explained that each tomb guard trains for months, learning strict routines that must be followed without fail. They are chosen not only for their physical ability but also for their character, discipline, and commitment to honor the unknown soldiers. "What you saw today is not just a performance," the guide said. "It's a pledge that every soldier's memory will be protected." The boys, especially Jake, listened intently. He tried to imagine standing perfectly still for hours under the hot sun, the cold rain, or even snow without moving, speaking or reacting unless necessary. It sounded impossible, yet the guard made it seem effortless, as though it were second nature. Jake could feel a strange mixture of admiration and guilt rise within him. Leo finally broke the silence. "Do you think he knew we were laughing?" he asked quietly. His voice barely rose above the soft wind moving through the trees. Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think he did. And he didn't yell or get angry, he just showed us respect and expected the same in return." Ryan frowned. "I didn't realize it was that serious. I mean, it's just a guy walking, right?" His voice trailed off as he realized how wrong he had been. "You were wrong," Jake said honestly, but without blame. "He's not just walking. He's standing for all the soldiers will never know. And we mocked him. That was stupid." As the group moved along, they noticed other tourists bowing their heads or leaving small flowers at certain graves. Jake saw one elderly man place a flag beside a tombstone and gently touch it before stepping back. There was no hurry, no noise, only quiet acknowledgement. Each small act seemed to tell a story of respect, courage, and remembrance. The boys started asking questions, this time with real curiosity. "Why does he walk exactly 21 steps?" Jake asked the guide. "Why that exact number?" The guide smiled. 21 steps is a symbolic gesture. It represents the highest military honor, the 21-gun salute. Every step, every movement, every pause is deliberate. Nothing is random. It is a demonstration of discipline, focus, and honor. Leo's eyes widened. I had no idea it meant that much. And that's why what we saw this morning mattered so much, the guide continued. The guard is not there for attention. He is there to honor those who cannot speak for themselves. Every action is a promise kept to them. The boys walked a little further, and soon they saw a young family with children watching the tomb guard from a distance. The kids were whispering questions to their parents, curious but respectful. Seeing their innocence reminded Jake of how little he had understood before. He thought about his own younger sister, imagining her standing there wide-eyed and respectful. By now, Jake felt a deep sense of humility. He realized that disrespect isn't just about breaking rules. It's about failing to understand the value of sacrifice and service. He looked at Ryan and Leo and saw that they shared the same understanding. They were no longer just boys on a field trip. They were witnesses to history and to honor itself. Mrs. Carter noticed the change in her students. She stopped and gathered them around one of the tombstones. I want each of you to think about what this place teaches. It teaches discipline, respect, courage, and remembrance. It reminds us that freedom comes at a cost, and those who serve deserve our honor. The boys nodded quietly. Jake felt tears prick at his eyes, not sadness but a mix of awe and respect. For the first time, he truly felt the weight of the lesson they had all witnessed. The guard's words, simple as they were, had done more than any lecture ever could. Suddenly, Leo whispered almost to himself, I want to tell my mom about this. She would understand how serious it is. His voice trembled slightly, filled with a new awareness. Jake smiled faintly. I think I want to tell my dad too. He's a veteran. He'll know why it matters. Ryan stayed quiet for a moment, thinking, then finally added, I feel kind of guilty. We laughed before. I didn't know. I just didn't get it. That's okay, Mrs. Carter said gently. What's important is that you do understand now. And that understanding is worth more than 1,000 jokes or photos. You've seen respect in action, and that's something you'll carry for the rest of your life. The boys stayed silent, reflecting on her words. As they walked back toward the main area of the cemetery, they noticed the guard continuing his patrol, perfectly composed, unaware of the internal transformations happening in the minds of the students. He carried on without a single word or glance, yet his presence had spoken volumes. On the bus ride back to their hotel, the boys remained quiet. The city outside was bustling, but inside the bus, a calm thoughtfulness had taken root. Jake looked out the window and whispered softly to himself, I never realized how important it is to respect people who stand for something bigger than themselves. I'll never forget this. Leo nodded beside him. Me neither, and I think I'll try to be better about it from now on. Even Ryan, who had been the most skeptical, finally admitted, Yeah, I get it now. It's not just marching. It's a promise. And it's huge. The guard's discipline, calm presence, and silent authority had done more than teach a lesson about rules. It had taught humility, awareness, and respect. The boys knew that the memory of that moment would stay with them long after they returned home. Long after the city sights faded from view, and somewhere deep inside, they all understood that the guard's simple duty was far greater than anyone could fully see. It wasn't about ceremony, attention, or recognition. It was about honor, memory, and a commitment to those who had given everything. By the time the bus reached their hotel, the boys were changed. They spoke less, thought more, and carried a newfound respect that extended beyond the cemetery. That day had started with jokes and whispers, but it ended with understanding and reflection, lessons they would carry for the rest of their lives. The bus ride back from Arlington National Cemetery was quiet. The city streets outside blurred as the students sat and thought. Jake, Ryan, and Leo remained unusually silent, each processing the morning's experience in their own way. They no longer joked or whispered, and the usual chatter of a school trip was replaced with a sense of reflection and calm. The weight of what they had witnessed still lingered in the air, an invisible reminder of honor, sacrifice, and respect. Jake leaned back in his seat, staring out the window. He kept thinking about the guard at the tomb, his every movement perfect, unwavering, and meaningful. The guard had said nothing personal, yet his presence had spoken volumes. It was more than discipline. It was a silent, living lesson about duty and honor. Jake's mind went back to the earlier laughter, to how he and his friends had mocked something they hadn't understood. Now that moment seemed almost shameful in comparison to the magnitude of what they had seen. Leo, sitting next to Jake, whispered quietly, almost to himself, "I think I want to tell my mom about this. She'd understand why it's so serious. She always talks about respect, but I didn't get it until now." Jake nodded slowly. "Yeah, me too. I want to tell my dad. He's a veteran and he'll know why this matters so much. I think he'll be proud we finally understood." Ryan, who had been staring at the ceiling, finally spoke. I feel kind of bad." I laughed. "I didn't mean to, but I didn't know it mattered." "I think I finally do now." Mrs. Carter, noticing the change in the boys, smiled quietly from the front seat. "That's the important thing," she said softly. "Understanding and reflection. What you experience today isn't something you forget. It stays with you, guiding how you think and act in the future." The rest of the trip passed in similar quiet contemplation. When they returned to the hotel, the boys went straight to their rooms but didn't turn on their phones or start games. Instead, they sat for a few moments thinking about what they had witnessed. The tomb guard had left an impression that went far beyond the ceremony itself. His calm authority, unwavering discipline, and respect for the unknown soldiers had touched something deep within them. That evening, Jake pulled out a notebook and began writing. He wrote about the guard, about the precise steps, about the way his uniform shone in the sunlight. He wrote about how he had laughed before, how wrong he had been, and how much he now respected the soldiers who gave their lives for others. Writing it down helped him process the lesson fully. Leo, meanwhile, called his mom. He spoke hesitantly at first, then with growing emotion. "Mom, I didn't understand at first. I thought it was just a guy walking back and forth, but it's so much more. It's about respect, sacrifice, about honoring people who gave their lives so others could live freely." On the other side of the line, his mother listened quietly, then said, "I'm proud of you, Leo. Understanding respect is one of the most important lessons you can learn. It's something that will stay with you for your whole life." Ryan decided to take another step. He wrote an apology letter to the tomb guard unit, expressing regret for laughing and showing disrespect during the ceremony. He explained that he didn't understand at the time but now appreciated the significance of the guard's duty. He folded the letter carefully and promised himself he would send it as soon as they returned home. The act of writing it made him feel lighter, as though he was acknowledging his mistake and learning from it. The next morning, the students returned to other parts of the city, visiting monuments and museums. But for Jake, Ryan, and Leo, nothing compared to what they had seen at Arlington. Every monument reminded them of courage, every statue whispered lessons of sacrifice, and every flag waving in the breeze seemed to carry a silent message: honor those who came before you. On the bus ride to the airport, the three boys reflected on how a single experience could change someone. "I never thought a simple march could feel so powerful," Jake said. "It's not about being scary or strict, it's about showing respect. And it hits you without anyone yelling or punishing you." Leo nodded. "Yeah, and the guard didn't have to say much. His presence did all the teaching." "I'll never forget it," Ryan added. "I think it even changed how I see myself. I want to be someone who respects things and people properly. I want to stand up for the right reasons, not just laugh without thinking." Their teacher smiled, realizing the impact the experience had on her students. She had seen many students visit Arlington, but rarely had she seen such a transformation in such a short time. "You've all learned something most people never fully understand," she said. "Honor, respect, discipline, and the understanding that freedom is not free. It comes at a cost. Never forget that." The boys kept that lesson close as they traveled back home. Over the following weeks, Jake shared the experience with his family, explaining how the guard's silent duty had taught him the meaning of respect and humility. Leo spoke to his mother and even discussed the ceremony with his younger siblings, trying to pass on the understanding he had gained. Ryan mailed his apology letter, feeling a sense of closure and personal growth. Months later, the memory of that day still stayed vivid. Whenever the boys saw veterans in their community, they greeted them with newfound respect. They noticed details they hadn't before: the way people stood during the national anthem, the quiet pride in those who had served, and the importance of honoring traditions. A simple field trip had turned into a life lesson that shaped their values and perspectives. One day, during a class discussion about citizenship and responsibility, Jake shared his experience at Arlington. He told the story of the tomb guard, the steps, the silence, and the lesson he had learned about respect and sacrifice. His classmates listened in awe, and many were inspired by the story. It was more than a history lesson. It was a personal story of growth and realization. The day at Arlington became a touchstone for all three boys. It reminded them that small actions or small disrespectful moments can have a big impact. It also reminded them that discipline, focus, and respect often speak louder than words. The tomb guard's silent dedication had left a lasting impression, one that shaped how they approached life, relationships, and responsibility. Years later, the boys, now young adults, would remember that moment with clarity. Jake would sometimes recount it to friends, emphasizing how respect and honor start with understanding. Leo would remember the call to his mother, and how important it was to share meaningful lessons with loved ones. Ryan would recall the act of writing the apology letter, and the importance of admitting mistakes and learning from them. That single day had started with careless laughter but ended with lessons that would last a lifetime. The tomb guard's commitment to duty and honor had changed three boys, shaping the way they viewed service, sacrifice, and respect. It reminded them that some lessons are best taught quietly, through presence and action rather than words alone. Even as the boys grew older, their memories of Arlington remained vivid. The sight of a flag, the sound of marching, or the memory of white tombstones in the sun brought back the same feelings of humility and awe. And every time they thought of that day, they felt a sense of gratitude, not just for the soldiers, but for the experience that taught them what it truly means to respect and honor others. The lesson was simple yet powerful. Respect isn't earned through fear or punishment. It's inspired through discipline, presence, and understanding. And for Jake, Ryan, and Leo, that lesson began with the tomb guard's unwavering steps, silent authority, and a promise to honor the unknown. It was a day they would never forget, a moment that changed their hearts and a memory they would carry forever.